Hi.
Hello, is that Geoffrey?
It is.
Hello, Geoffrey. My name's Matthew Pejkovic. Thank you for taking the time out to talk to me this morning.
That's my pleasure.
Great. I just want to say congratulations with your movie, The Eye of the Storm. I saw it a couple of weeks ago, and I absolutely loved it.
Oh, great. Very good.
Did you know of Patrick White's novel before receiving a script for the movie?
I hadn't read the novel, but I knew Patrick as a playwright, primarily. I've been involved with his later work when he wrote, he was sort of rediscovered, I suppose, by Neil Armfield, a long-time collaborator of mine, the director, and Jim Sharman. I think Jim had sort of done revivals of the work in the late 70s of Season at Sarsaparilla and Cheery Soul. And then Jim commissioned Patrick to write a play for Lighthouse Theatre Company, which was the state theatre company in South Australia back in the early 80s. I was a member of that ensemble. And subsequently, Neil then went on and directed revivals of Ham Funeral and Season at Sarsaparilla and Cheery Soul and Night on Law Mountain. And during the time at Lighthouse, Patrick wrote another play called Netherwood. And in the late 80s in Adelaide, we also did a production of a play of his called Shepherd on the Rocks. So I knew Patrick when he was probably in his late 60s, early 70s. The only other novels I've been aware of were things like Voss. I'd read Voss, and I'd read, which I actually turned an opera as well. That was Jim Sharman. But I knew Voss, I knew The Solid Mandala, but I'd never read Eye of the Storm.
Yep.
But I know it intimately now because Fritz R was very keen in the pre-production period, particularly with Judy Davis and myself. We spent quite a number of weeks in a sort of developmental workshop phase. He said, look, I want you to dig into the novel and see if there's any elements in there that you think would, will help realize the characterizations that Judy Morris has, outlined in the screenplay.
Yep. And working with Fred Stepsy, was he a director that you always wanted to work with?
Yeah, I've got to know Fred quite well over the last 10 years. I'm a patron of the Melbourne Film Festival, and Fred seems to spend half his time in New York and half his time in Australia.
Yep.
And we're sort of neighbours in the country down on the Mornington Peninsula, so we see each other quite a lot socially. A couple of years back, at the Melbourne Film Festival, they asked me to, and Eric, I think, they asked us to host a retrospective screening of a favourite Australian film, and I chose The Chant of Jimmy Blacksmith because I remember seeing it back in the late 70s when it was released. I'd just come back from having studied in Europe for about 4 years, and was aware that there was, a major new development in Australian filmmaking, and Jimmy Blacksmith, I think, is an absolute classic. And at the screening, it was very interesting because I thought, well, it'd be interesting to see how many people turn up for this. But the cinema was packed of, 400 or 500 people. And the great thing was a lot of them were the sort of myth crowd, probably mostly in their 20s and 30s, and you could feel this sense in the auditorium that to them it was an old movie, something way before their time, and you could sense that people knew they were in the presence of extraordinarily great society's conflict with an indigenous population, a very specific story. But, and I've always felt that, you know, if you look at Fred's body of work, he's one of those great directors who finds what's inside the story and brings it to life with the greatest sort of dramatic detail that he can give it, without ever putting an overtly personal stamp on it. Do you know what I mean? There are no kind of overt hallmarks. If you look at any of his films from, you know, the early Australian films like Devil's Playground and Jimmy Blacksmith, through to the work he did out of the Hollywood studio system with Russia House and 6 Degrees of Separation and things like that. They're all quite. There's no common theme. They are very diverse projects, but they kind of, you know, live and breathe on their own terms.
When you work alongside such formidable talents like Judy Davis and Charlotte Rampling, does that force you to lift up your game even more to match what they're giving to you?
Of course. I mean, I've worked with Judy on 4 films, so I kind of... the first one was Hoodwink, which...
that was your cameo in
1980. We didn't actually work together on that. We were both in the credits list. She was really the star of that film, and I had a very small part. But subsequently, we've shot from the mid-90s onwards. We did Children of the Revolution and then Swimming Upstream. So it's... I'll probably work with her more in Australian films than with anybody else.
Your character, Basil Hunter, he's strange in that he puts on an act whenever he's off stage, yet when he's on the stage he wants to reveal everything about himself. Is that typical of actors as a whole?
That's a very interesting point. You know, I mean, in the story from the novel, both Basil and Dorothy, you know, well into their middle age with an aging mother, and both siblings have reached some kind of sort of dead end in their lives. Dorothy's has married into European royalty, minor royalty, and that's been a complete failure and sort of shattered her sense of self. And Basil's become a very sort of famous, you know, Australian expatriate, knighted actor in the London theatre world, but he's also reached some sort of sense of, I suppose, personal malaise. And the story brings them both back to Australia because the dying mother is there. It's probably quite mercenary. They need the